Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome to the Arturia SQ-80-V tutorial series. Today we're going to have a look at some of the advanced settings. We're going to get to it from this little cog button. I say this little cog button, it's behind my head, it's there. Turn that thing on. Should be okay from that point onwards. And we get this extra window open up on the right hand side. The settings tab, which is the default thing when you open this page, contains nothing of interest to me. I very rarely constrain instruments on MIDI channels because I don't have a complex physical hardware setup, so I don't need to worry about separating instruments out by MIDI channel. I just leave that set to all. And the rest of these settings are for MIDI polyphonic expression settings. This is basically, you need a keyboard capable of generating this stuff. I think Rolly is probably the most famous implementation of it, where individual keys are capable of sending different expression values on different MIDI channels. It's not something I use, so I'm not going to attempt to talk about it with any authority. If your keyboard supports that, look into it. What we really want to talk about today are the MIDI and macro pages. So we'll start off on the MIDI page, and this, believe it or not, is where we do our MIDI control mapping. Now, it's a little bit difficult to tell that because there are so many controls in this table, what's going on. If I click this add control button down here, for instance, you can see just how many MIDI enabled operations we've got. It's a very large number indeed. And we've got some default stuff set up here. The reason you see this list is because the MIDI config is currently set to SQ-80-V default MIDI config. Every time you select that option, it'll basically load this list with these settings in. So for instance, just by way of one example, the time control, which is this knob, we're going to talk about that today, is currently assigned to CC value 16. Okay, just have a look at this mixer amount knob here. If I click the learn button, a load of stuff turns purple and red. Purple means there's no current MIDI controller assignment to it, so there's no CC value that's going to pour out of any piece of hardware that's going to interact with this stuff, and the red controls are currently configured. So let's say I want to map this mixer amount knob. If I select that, you can see now we've got -- mod mixer amount appear in this list. The SQ-80 is now waiting for me to move something on one of my physical devices. So I've got a CC knob on my native instruments complete here, which outputs CC22. So if I turn that knob, you see the control just turned red and it was mapped to CC22. Now we're still in learn mode. If I inadvertently now move the next knob along, which is 23, you can see it's just overwritten. So you need to remember to come out of learn. Once you've set that assignment, once you've hardwired your piece of physical equipment to the SQ-80, come out of learn mode, and now that knob's mapped. So if I turn CC23, which was the last assignment I made, there you can see the knob moving. Now you can see also that I'm able to move that control all the way from minimum to maximum, but I can constrain that value. If I set the minimum to halfway, and now turn my knob, the first thing that you're going to notice is the moment I move the knob at all, it snaps. That's because the controller itself is remembering what its last value was. Now we're into a territory where you've got absolute and relative values here, and it's a little bit murky. I don't want to get into it today because it's a 10-minute conversation in its own right, but most controller values on most hardware, I shouldn't say that. Many controller values are capable of outputting absolute values or relative values. This is currently in absolute mode, so it kind of jumped because the keyboard itself knows where its knob kind of virtually was. From this point onwards, I'm turning the knob as far anti-clockwise as I possibly can, and you see it's not going past 12 o'clock. That's what this minimum value does here. It's constraining the possible changes that I can make to this value from 0.5 up to 1. Even though I said I wasn't going to get too deep into it today, I will very briefly mention that if you right click on the MIDI value itself, you can switch from absolute to relative mode. You need to make sure that your hardware instrument is set to the same output level as well. The CC value, the knob that you're moving, needs to have the same setting as this here, and most keyboards, and mine included, default to absolute position, so I'm not messing with that today, just to let you know that it's there if you want to experiment with it. The other thing to bear in mind is that these values can be inverted. Now I hate doing this because it's just too confusing, my brain falls out my ears, but from this point onwards, When I move the controller clockwise, the value is going down. I'm now going to move my controller anti-clockwise and the controller goes up. I will find any other way to achieve an automation solution before I do that because it just confuses me too much. Just head back into the Learn menu for a moment. All the red stuff can be very easily unassigned simply by right-clicking on it. That basically just kills that mapping. You can see LFO waveform 1 is now no longer mapped to anything. That's no problem though. I can click on it to select it. You can just see these two values here are white. That's what indicates that it's currently selected. And now if I move a knob, it's been mapped to CC25, which is the fourth knob along on my keyboard. And you can also manually override these CC values. If I double click in it, type 26, it's now assigned to knob number 5 on my keyboard. Okay, heading over to the macro page now. A macro is basically an umbrella under which multiple different commands can be stored. And at the bottom right hand corner of the instrument, you can see that we've got 4 macro controls. Now they're called brightness, timbre, time and movement, but they don't have to be. You can basically rename these things to anything you want. It really doesn't matter. It's just a placeholder under which various operations are going to be assigned. Now let's get back to brightness rather than Bob. So at the moment, brightness is describing something that's going on with the filter cutoff frequency. As I move this thing up and down, you can hear it quite clearly doing that thing. But that's entirely programmatic. Not only can the name of the control be changed, but what it does can also be changed. So at the moment it's currently set to filter cutoff frequency. I could right click and delete that macro and it would disappear. I can also assign any number of different commands to a single macro umbrella. So in addition to this knob modulating the cutoff frequency, let's also make it modulate the cutoff resonance at the same time. So the way that we do this is to click the Learn button. And now, similar to the Midi controls, you can see that everything's been highlighted. All I have to do is click on the resonance control and it now maps. So both of those controls have been mapped simultaneously. So as I move the knob up and down, you can see both of those changes happening. If I want to assign a CC value to brightness, I can, but I have to do it from the Midi page. If I select the brightness control, enter Learn and move knob 29, there you go, I'm mapped. Okay, back over on the Midi tab, let's have a little bit more of a look at what's going on down here. So similar to the Midi controls, you can constrain the range over which those macros will operate. Every individual mapping can have its own minimum and maximum values, but if we click the little right angle bracket, you can see that we've got a multi-point graph that we can draw. Now bear in mind that these are modulation effects. So this can get really confusing. If you've got a knob that goes from 0 to maximum, but that knob over the course of its journey is going up and down, you can see as I move the control clockwise, then that filter is going up and down the cutoff in accordance with my instructions. So all of the functionality that we saw in the envelope page operates on these macro pages as well. I can right click to delete nodes, I can pick nodes up and move them. The purple horizontal line tells me what my current value is set to. Now I can only open one of these windows at a time, so I've just opened the filter resonance, which is a little bit unfortunate because sometimes I want to be able to compare the two together, but sadly we can't. This is also, as a matter of interest, a way to set a different kind of minimum and maximum range. So you can see you can draw different shapes of gradient within the modulation window and then have an overall minimum and maximum as well, at which point, once again, my brain dribbles out my ears too much. I pretty much always constrain these things to minimum and maximum. I very rarely get too carried away with using multiple different modulation ranges. It's just too confusing for me to keep track of. Speaking of which, if we have a look at the timbre knob on this particular preset, so this is the Cubase preset, just one of the stock things that comes with the instrument. This is an example of the kind of stuff that I don't like seeing. So we've got two different DCA levels being modulated here, but one of them is going back to front. So DCA level 1 at minimum is at maximum. And this is where you need to be cautious about getting too fancy with your internal graphs, because the linear envelope graph itself, the multi-point envelope, is a straightforward linear curve, but now it's describing a journey from minimum to maximum, which is basically upside down. So if I really want to mess with my head, I can do this kind of thing, and now you see it basically like two negatives become a positive. So those two DCA levels are now operating synchronously. Here are the controls over here. Yeah, if you want to do that, knock yourself out, but I don't. The time knob's a nice example of multiple controls being assigned to a single knob. So here you can see we've got the decay of envelope 1 being modulated. There's that. The attack time of envelope 2, and then two different envelope points. From this node here up to the sustain is also being stretched. Make both of those to maximum so that we can see it nice and easily. Two different nodes being stretched at the same time. So they're really powerful and really easy and intuitive to use, as long as you just bear in mind that you've got two separate envelope controls and it's really easy to get confused between them. Okay, that'll do us for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Please hit the like button if you did. I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.